Session title describes it. We're going to be discussing the book Feeling Kerala and a lot else, actually. The canvas is quite vast. We're going to be discussing the book. We're going to be talking about translations. We're going to be talking about the short story as well. Starting off, Feeling Kerala is an anthology of, to simply put it, of contemporary short stories written in Malayalam. And there have been quite a few anthologies of stories that have been coming out recently from different publishing houses. The best of literature from Malayalam or from different other languages. The idea there is to compile a selection of what the editor considers the best from that language. Feeling Kerala, the idea behind it is different, and which is what I found most interesting about the book. Devika tries to unearth what life in Kerala currently is through the stories that are there. So Devika, I would like to actually ask you to explain this further. When you started working on the anthology, why did you choose to go about it in this way, and how did the selection of stories take place?
So this started off as a response to a suggestion that I write a book, a popular book, but one based on data about Kerala post the 1970s. So the most common and widespread understanding of Kerala that we all share, especially those people outside Kerala, both Malayali and non-Malayalis outside Kerala shares, is about a Kerala that is pre-1970s. Or there is very little of the post-1970s of Kerala that informs our understanding of this society. So the suggestion was that I write something based on data post-1970s. Now I gave it a thought. Yeah, there is a mountain of data one could use. I mean, there is a lot of research on what has happened to, say, agriculture, industry, services, human development. All this post-1970s, it's perfectly possible to write a book. All one needs to do is to extract that data, do some analysis, and of course it's very convenient because there's a pile of secondary sources one could use as a social scientist to put together this book. But I thought that, well, the thing about quantitative research and quantitative sources is that you get the most generalizable or general trends. That's all. That's what you get. If you look at population statistics, for example, you get the most generalizable aspects. What you don't get is really the complexity of the society. Essentially, quantitative research reduces complexity. So you will get a less complex, you will get perhaps a complicated picture, because complexity and complicatedness are quite different. So you might get a very complicated picture, but you will not get a complex idea of Kerala. So then maybe, one could travel in Kerala, one could write like a qualitative researcher does. But then this was a pandemic project. So anyway, that was, even if I were provided the material resources to do that, that was more or less impossible. And so then I was also at that point of time a little worried about where my role as translator was going. Because I started work as a translator in Kerala some 20 years back, more than 20 years back. At that point, it was for me a very political act, because at that point I had felt that women's writing in Kerala was being reduced to the pre-existing male-dominated homo-aesthetic circles, to the terms of their aesthetics. So I thought it was important for me to translate them so that they are available in another language, and their political charge is not completely erased by local interpretations. Now, by 2020, I thought that phase was more or less over, and there were also these huge changes happening in the literary public sphere itself. The market was becoming dominant in the literary public. So, in a sense, one was producing what? One was producing best-selling authors. Not really, I didn't feel the pressure at all to contribute to the market, unless I was being paid properly, and I was not being paid properly. Translators never get paid properly. So I thought, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? And at that point, it struck me that it was important for me to reinvent myself as a translator. And I kind of thought that this is the time for me to convert myself, to bring to bear my own work as historian and social scientist, and my skills as a translator. So I put this suggestion to an editor in Penguin, that is. I asked him if Premanka, that is, I asked Premanka if it would be okay if I put together a collection of short stories from Malayalam which would serve your purpose. Essentially, the purpose of initiating the reader into the complexities of Malayali society. Now, when I'm talking about complexities, that doesn't mean that they are statistically, the different things that are touched upon in this anthology are statistically dominant in Kerala. Some of them are not, but they basically about emerging things that are going to be important in the way society is shaped. And he was open to this idea. And of course, this is a very new, this is new. We haven't done this. I haven't seen, I didn't have a model to do this. So one had to kind of literally craft it in one's head. And he asked me how I was going to choose these. I said, my criterion is this. Of course, first of all, it has to be representative in a broad sense, in the sense that I want to, when I say representative, I'm talking about the different positions from which people are writing. So in a broad sense, I wanted that to be representative. So you had to have a fair number of women writing, because right now Malayalam literature has a lot of women presence, which is quite different from the 20th century, when very few women wrote, and those few women who wrote were stars. So now you have a lot of women who are like middle brow, but produce a lot. Maybe one or two stars, but the rest are all middle pro writers who come up with stellar writing at points. Like points that just illuminate things that are happening in society that may not be captured by your statistics. So I said, I'm going to make a choice looking at, these are my criterion. The stories must be illuminating some aspect of society that the statistics don't capture, number one. Number two is, I wanted a selection which will reflect the positions from which people are writing. So that Premanka was happy with, and of course he had to set limits. I could not go on and on. So and because this was an experiment and you didn't know how it would get marketed and all that, so he finally, initially it was 10 stories, but then I pushed for 12. So that's how this happened. Yeah. That's how I got going.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought up women writers, because there are a number of stories from women writers, and I think in the entire collection, the fury in their voices is very obvious. In your note, you also call it, I think you call it the age of the angry young woman, and. Just wanted to touch upon the aspect of culture and misogyny, because that is one area whenever I'm in Kerala that I'm completely surprised by, really, at the level of misogyny that still exists in small ways, which despite the education and I felt, despite women being in employment, refuses to go away. But I think you have a different point of view when...
Well, yes, if you look at the collection, there are 5 out of the 12. 5 are 5 stories are written by women, and I also I'm glad that I didn't. Now Meera is identified. K.R. Meera is identified as the most prominent feminist voice, but the story that in that collection that we have is I think something that reveals a very different kind of writing from Meera, which is about, I mean, Srinarayana Dharma. Basically, she uses the language of Srinarayana to actually critique a kind of hate and anger towards minorities, etc., which is coming from an NRI, position. So it's a very interesting story. It's called Sangi Annan. But the other stories are, you write too, and I'm glad you mentioned the angry young woman. I've been saying that for Kerala for a long time, because if you look at the past 30 years, one of the things that happened after 1980s, the mid 1980s onwards, is that very large number of women started entering higher education in Kerala. So if you look at the present state in institutions of higher education, there are often more women than men, and that is also the case in technical institutions as well, except for the highest the highest levels of education, PhD and so on. You would find more young women than men. So women have made this huge entry into public education, and you know that what that means, because and even if you look at school education, the dropout rates are higher for the boys than the girls. So more girls stay in the education system for a longer time, and you know that modern education is all about individuation. So more women are individuated in that sense in Kerala for a long time. But this is one aspect. But if you look at the employment scenario, that is dismal. In fact, so the prospects of employment for women in Kerala are absolutely dismal. So if you look at marriages, your data on marriages, it clearly shows that the bridegrooms are less educated than the brides in general. So all this has consequences. So you have an extremely individuated woman, young woman, who is, who has to get into, who is married. So she has to, the confinement of the domestic is the space in which she has to, the individuated energies that this woman has must play out in this space, and that can have all kinds of toxic consequences to the woman herself, and to everybody else. I mean, that can also happen. Now the point is, that's one thing. And the other thing, so, and even if the woman is highly educated and she is employed, she's still a burden, because caste endogamy in Kerala is protected by the institution of dowry. So the biggest incentive for endogamy in Kerala is dowry. So if you marry a woman of your own caste, you can demand dowry. If you do not do that, you cannot ask, you cannot demand. The wife's family may still pay up, but you can't demand. So endogamy in Kerala is protected by the institution of dowry. So and basically endogamy enables what is called hypergamy, that is marrying into a family that's higher than yours in class terms, essentially. So for the young woman, this is highly frustrating. So in the 1970s, you had the angry young man who was angry with the state for breaking all its promises, and with the patriarch, therefore rebelled against the patriarch, of course ending up as the patriarch themselves. That's another story. But my argument has been that in the 21st century in Kerala, you have the angry young woman, who finds that in her family, her brother always, however useless he may be, still has a premium in the marriage market. The most useless man in Kerala will still get 1 lakh rupees in the marriage market. But a highly talented woman, maybe she is the district collector, then the family will have to run around looking for a guy who is superior to her, so that amount of dowries will still have to be paid. And this is what I call structural worthlessness. The woman is, worthy, that's another, but she's structurally worthless. So this structural worthlessness, it produces a fury in women in young women, and that is where we find the angry young woman. So the collection opens with Yama's fantastic story. It's in Malayalam. It's called Chudalathenga, the funerary palm, where she herself is, she embodies the angry young woman in her work as a theatre artist. I've seen her do it, and this story is almost theatrical, in the way it enacts the angry young woman. So that is why, and that's why I also found it important to preface every short story with a small note, a small 500 word note, which explains why the story is interesting, in this kind of a book.
Devika, you mentioned a while ago that the number of women writers has proliferated now from the time perhaps you translated K.R. Meera or maybe even earlier. I just wanted to talk about patriarchy and the literary field, actually. And I think in every language, there is that the male bastion, which is, they consider themselves the caretakers of literature, and whether it's in Hindi, it's in Tamil, and I'm sure, I'm curious about what it was in, say, 20 years ago in Malayalam, and whether it has changed now.
I mean, one of the books that I have produced as a researcher, as a historical researcher, is a kind of a preliminary attempt to trace the history of the modern Malayalam literary public in the 20th century. And I've been trying to argue that we need to have a deeper sociology, a historical sociology of the literary public in Kerala of the 20th century particularly. And one of my proposals has been a concept called the homo aesthetic circle. The homo aesthetic circle is something like, you must have, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the work of Eve Kofowski Sedgwick, who advances the idea of the homosociality. Homosociality is a way of socializing among men, which is not homosexual, which is full of desire in some sense. The energy of desire is still there, but it is not, homosexual. In fact, if at all, it actually prevents the open emergence of homosexual desire, but it is a way of connecting among men, which is very strong bonding, extremely strong bonding between men. So I kind of drew upon that to coin this word homo aesthetic circle, by which you have in the 20th century, if you look at the sociology of the literary public, it is full of homo aesthetic circles based on a major critic or a writer, male always, surrounded by editors, readers, critics, many other, a whole group, which profess allegiance to a particular kind of aesthetics. So you have the liberal humanist homoaesthetic circle, you have the Stalinist Marxist homoaesthetic circle, you have the radical left homoaesthetic circle of the 1980s, you have the late modernists, the early modernists, you have groups of that, and the women writers are always placed at the edge of it somewhere. So Lalitambika Andarjana, when she's read by the liberal humanists, will be read as the mother of all, mother of writing, or whatever, maternal, someone who wrote maternal stories and all that. And if it is the Stalinist Marxists who are reading it, she will be hailed as the destroyer of feudal institutions. So, Madhavi gave them all the slip. It was very difficult to corral her in one or the other. But it was fairly easy. I mean, and all the better, the four great women writers of the 20th century, I mean, of course, Rajalakshmi did not live very long, but the other four, all resisted being corralled into one of these circles or the other, but that was how they were read and understood. So when I remember when I read them as a feminist critic, I found that there were shades to their writing which were completely erased, totally forgotten. Now what happened after the 1980s, as I told you, from 1985 you have a large number of women entering higher education. So earlier, now if you look at Sarah Joseph, was perhaps the last of these writers to be actually consecrated by a homoaesthetic circle. Consecration is the exact equivalent of what happens in a temple. So you have this female writer who's taken in by one of these circles and consecrated like a deity, and then you know how it is in a Hindu temple. You have to perform worship if the deity has to emit its energy. And a deity that is not worshipped has no energy, right? Likewise, you have Sarah Joseph placed at the middle of, as the ultimate feminist writer by the radical left critics, right? The radical left homoaesthetic circle consecrates her and then worships her. At the end of the 1970s, you have women writers who don't even claim to be feminists, rebelling against it. So you have Chandramati, you have Grace is saying we don't want to be consecrated. Of course they do it. If you look at the language in which they do it, they only have the resources of liberal humanism to say that, oh, we want to be free, we don't want we don't want to be labeled thus and so on. So they use the language of liberal humanism because that's all they have at that point. But they definitely resist being consecrated in one way or the other. And I think by the end of the 10 years, you have a large number of women who are entering modern education, higher education, who are using writing as a technology of the self. And bursting into the field of literature, well, they don't need to be consecrated enough. And I think Kerr Mira's writing came out of that. And yeah, agreed that this is middle-brow writing. This is not high-brow, in any sense. This is middle-brow in the sense that it is, usually using realism. Not really wandering very far away from realist techniques, but reaching a very large section of the readership. Expanding the literary public in very important ways. I am completely aware of the pitfalls of middle-brow writing. Some of those pitfalls are now upon us, but still, I think it is a historical moment in Malayalam literature.
What do you mean when you say the pitfalls are upon us right now?
Well, I think the problem with middle-brow is that it's a very delicate kind of dance between writing. It's not exactly lowbrow, no? So it's not outright pandering to the sensibilities of the masses, etc. It's not that. On the other hand, it's not also highbrow in the sense that it is full-on experimentation with aesthetic techniques and so on, which maybe only a few people can grasp. People who have been part of the literary public for a long time can grasp. No, this is there. When you start reading theory, for example, now if you read some social theory, for example, some parts of Derrida, if you haven't read Lévi-Strauss, you will not understand that. Likewise, in some experimental writings, if you're not familiar with certain styles that have come before you, you will not make any sense of what's going on. It just feels like some gibberish and something like that. So middle-brow means taking a middle path, which is not that highbrow, but not also lowbrow, and it's a very delicate and careful exercise. One small mistake means that you can just collapse into this lowbrow mass kind of thing. What's happened, I think, after social media is that you have each of these middle-brow writers have acquired a huge fan following, and they're not readers, they're fans. And this, I think, exerts an implicit pressure on the writers to become, to write on themes and use techniques that these fans prefer. And I think the middle-brow writers are more prone to it precisely because they are open to the masses. The highbrow ones may not be. So, and that is taking a toll on I think the literary quality.
Yeah, I wanted to come, back to the book. Uh, as I mentioned earlier, it's a anthology of contemporary writing, and I think fiction writing in Malayalam currently is extremely exciting, and there are there are such talented writers and some extraordinary work coming out, which, though I don't read Malayalam, because Malayalam literature is being translated so prolifically now, I've been privileged enough to read. Uh, would you be able to explain the shift in the writing that has taken place? Uh, uh, Malayalam literature has been lauded for over generations. But what are the concerns of the present generation of writers, and perhaps the form? If you could kind of identify this.
And I want to go back to the expansion of higher education in the 80s, 1980s. That's a very important moment where I think the availability of higher education to a much larger range of people in the Malayali population. I mean, earlier it was available to only privileged sections, and then it began to open up to a much larger numbers, sections of people. So I think the range of experience that the Malayalam literature now captures is much broader than it was, say, in the 1980s or so. So, and that I think has contributed very much to the richness of Malayalam literature now. So that is probably why there is so much interest in Kerala, because the market, of course, wants a range of experience, and that range is available here. And the short story form has particularly been interesting because like for example, I mean, we have Nandomar here. I mean, he is one of our greatest short story writers, and the kind of themes he brought into. This was a time when computers and the internet and all these things were just barely becoming familiar, and of course now Kerala has the highest internet penetration. In fact, it's an area which has some of the highest internet penetration and cell phone penetration in the world. Hmm? So that way, this was beginning at that point, and so at that point, when it was only starting, some of Nanduma's short stories, for example, suddenly brings to light a new experience, a new way of seeing things, a new. So the short story form, and it's not like the novel. The novel is about, I think, major languages, major societies, where they have they have they have long stories to tell about the nation. Kerala has always been a minor region. Malayalam has been a minor language within the Indian languages. So at least I'm talking about the 20th century, the mid 20th century. So if you look at the parallel is with Urdu. Urdu has always been has been a language that was marginal to the nation. Kerala has been a region and Malayalam has been a language both marginal to the nation. And therefore we have the stories that we are talking, our experience is far more fragmented, and the short story is a much better form. And towards the end of the 20th century, the more fragmented that experience became, with migration becoming a dominant, shaping, a social shaping reality in Kerala, something that was like quite fundamental to how we perceive ourselves as Malayali, and to this range of more and more people gaining access to writing as a technology of the self. So you have this explosion of talent, especially in short story, also in poetry, and in fact, if you're talking about form and challenges to form, perhaps poetry is also a very good place to see this explosion of talent coming out of these sources.
No, I've always found, the publishing of short stories like an interesting phenomena. While the short story flourishes in Malayalam, in Bengali, in various other Indian languages, when it comes to publishing in English, I it's a hard sell. You know, I'm always surprised at the lack of readership, unless say you have an anthology such as this, or you have an anthology which claims to be a collection of the greatest in the language. Um, uh, uh, and perhaps, as you mentioned, I mean, in Malayalam, for instance, the short story is published by your newspapers, by your journals. So the accessibility to the short story is wide, and thus the craft of writing short stories has also developed quite a bit, and. But I want to move away from the craft of it to the impact fiction may have on social life. Because the short story, which, as we see in this anthology, deals with social issues, are being written so much, are being so widely read. Is it just a record of the experience, or is the reading of it also impacting social life in any way?
Well, I suppose we all know by now that literature does not have any direct, one-on-one impact on social life. That is not something we expect. Now, the novel in Kerala also has an interesting trajectory, but the novel, I think, the contemporary novel is, I think, shaped by two things. One is the influence of a lot of Latin American literature, which is translated into Malayalam, which is having a bad impact. If you ask me, you have writers who write, who try to almost imitate Latin American novels, but end up, because in the Kerala context, for example, the sexuality of young people, teenagers and children, they have a completely different import in Latin American novels. But when they appear in Kerala, in some among the middlebrow novelists, it appears as trauma porn. So you can imagine, because this is a conservative society. So here you will interpret the sexuality, the sexual desire among young people. You can only present it to the Malayali reading public as a kind of trauma. You have to pornify it, and you have to add trauma to it, and that will. So in a sense, this kind of reliance on ideas, big ideas, you have to look somewhere else. So that is the second kind of impulse to write the novel in Kerala, I think, is to do with breaking down the singularity of Kerala itself. So you have, you retrieve local languages, you retrieve. Now, for example, if you read Harish's Misha, central to it is that the way in which Malayalam, the demotic of the Kuttanad area. If you've read it in Malayalam, in English you'll completely miss it. But in Malayalam, you will that demotic is an important part of that novel. So also demotics almost have the status of characters. So now I would say that all this is perhaps part of social change rather than inciting social change on its own. There is a kind of a moment which is, back and forth. So the idea of Kerala is suspect now, for many reasons. And you see that manifest in literary writing, in the novel particularly. But what is interesting about the short story is that it seems to be able to talk of power at the moment of its application. It seems to be able to capture power at the very moment of its manifestation. So there is a certain immediacy to the short story, which I think is almost impossible when it comes to the novel. So it's interesting how a whole bunch of people, very talented writers in Malayalam, start off as short story writers. They do very well, and then for some reason they feel impelled to write the novel. I don't know why. And they usually, I don't know, I mean, they don't match up. They really don't match up to the short stories. I mean, you kind of end up thinking, okay, this novel is interesting. It has a lot of interesting gimmicks. I mean, even gimmicks are fun to read. They're not bad. It's interesting to see people, perform whatever. So even the gimmick, if nicely arranged set of gimmicks can be good reading, but they may not really be a response to power. They might be much more of they may not be a critical response to power. They may be a much more a critical, what should I say, welcoming response to the market. Because there is a feeling that this sells, people will like it, So that's, I think the Middlebrow in the novel is far less promising than the Middlebrow in short story.
Devika, I want to ask you about the craft of translating. You've been translating for a really long time. In an anthology such as this, the voices of each of the authors are so vastly different. What are the challenges of singularly translating so many different authors?
Well, I think, you have to remain unfaithful to the letter, but faithful to the affect. I mean, that's all I would say. I mean, if you remain faithful to the letter, I think you have lost it, because you've lost the story. But you have to be faithful to the affect that it is able to generate in the reader. So I think the idea should be the translator will have to definitely focus on essentially reproducing the affect. And it is excellent if you can work with the author on this, because the author knows, in a sense, the author has gone through that process of generating a certain effect through that writing. Now, are you able to reproduce the effect is the challenge. If you, one-on-one translate, if you just translate each word and string them together, I think that is a travesty. It is an insult to the author. So so then, if you're focusing on the affect, then your reading has to be really deep, and then I've seen that you discover that writing is less pitch perfect. Where the writing is less than pitch perfect. Whereas in another kind of reading, you may not discover that. So I think translation is it's difficult. It's a lot like a jeweler's craft, So suppose you have a gold necklace, and you want me to set those diamonds or whatever stones that you have in another metal. I will have to make sure that the stones catch the light the best. So the metal that you have might be of a different quality, but you still want to make sure that each stone catches the light the best. So it's like a jeweler's craft. So it's like a jeweler's craft. So you have to be very, very careful. It takes time, it takes effort, and so it's a craft in many ways.
Yeah, I do want to open up to questions from the audience. Before that, a simple question from me, actually. There have been about the landscape of translation, really. So there have been a number of JCB award winners, for awards given for Malayalam novels, and I think given the value of the prize, it has started a conversation, and there have been I think there are more numbers of translations from Malayalam that are happening, and we do have an increasing number of really good translators as well now. Can you comment on how the landscape may have changed recently? And
Yeah, I am. I am thankfully award free. It's like child free, you know. It's a bit like that, because I mean, I'm also been, for some reason, sitting on award committees since 2007 when I first published. Partly it is the greed to read all these books. You know, you feel greedy that you get, they send you all the best books of the year, so it's, you feel greedy. You know, you want to really plunge into all that. So that's what has driven me into these committees. But I can tell you that, well, I can assure anyone, any of the authors sitting here, that if you haven't won any awards, please don't take it seriously at all. Because while the committees do their work very seriously, there's no doubt to that. There are people in, I mean, the committee is always a diverse group. Some of the people in the committee may not have anything to do with literature seriously. They might not be following literature seriously. So the books are never contextualized, for example. So their literary contribution in the sense of what aesthetic breaks they are making may not be noticed, may not really be noticed. So you have a whole bunch of books that are coming from very different. And Malayalam wins a lot these days because I think of the sheer diversity of the experience that it seems to be showing. So a lot of non-Malayali readers who are on the committees are just dazzled by. But if you place the same books in Kerala, they may not sound great. So that's one reason. And I want to tell anybody, I mean, again, I want to repeat this. Awards are, I don't know, awards are no guarantee that the book is going to be great. And you remember, just also look at the short stories are not very often allowed to compete. Some prizes don't allow short story collections to be included. Also, if the author is no longer alive, then it's very difficult to even get their work published. Even if they are, you know, I mean, better than Nobel Prize winners, very few publishers will take on their work. And that actually gives the lie to this idea that translators are now somehow, you know, finally redeemed. They're not. It's not the translator's choice of the author that matters. What matters is the author. So the author has to be alive. Otherwise, so you see, so these are all considerations of the market that come into play when we are looking at awards. While awards are important, and as you rightly point out, they are a point at which books get discussed, and you know, there is a lot of interest in the sense that, I mean, I don't think we would have discussed Khalid Javed's book, for example, or say Shamsher Rahman Farooqi's marvelous book. We would not have, I mean, there would not have been an all India discussion of these books if there were no awards. I agree. But at the same time, I think it's very important to keep in mind that the awards really do not say much about the quality of the books that are competing. Sometimes you just make that. I know that there were choices sometimes made just because the book was being attacked so vehemently by, you know, the enemies of free speech and so on. So sometimes some books get buoyed by that concern, but that doesn't mean that this is the best book of the year or something. So that's, I mean, that's my take on awards. I would be not awarded, you know, because that's a burden. It's a big burden, and it's a little like being coffined, you know. I mean, it's like being, you know, you've been given a grand funeral or something. You're not alive anymore, you know. So
thanks, Devika. I would like to, invite the audience to ask questions.
Madam, I think we have met at Parishat Vedi. Apart from our acclaimed writers, there are many female writers. They were writing in social media, especially in blogs. Where do we place them in this, especially in your translation works? Do you find anyone like right to be mentioned?
No, I think multiplication. Yeah, this is what I've been talking about. There's a multiplication of spaces you're free from now, which are free from the policing of highbrow or whatever. But but you also must have noticed that whenever someone writes in a blog or on Facebook or whatever, and their writing sounds like it is garnering a whole bunch of writers, I mean readers or fans even, that gets published. And there is a there is a circulation between online and offline spaces, and that's very active. And the market has sensed that opportunity and is actually taking active advantage of it. So I think people who write on blogs ultimately want to publish. But for me, the advantage is if you put it on a blog, it's free. It's available. They're free. So I'm one of the old, copyleft nuts. I think left. So I want a version to be online free. So I still do both.
Hi. Yeah, okay. So I was listening to Mr. Jay Mohan the other day, and he was talking about the Sanskritization of Malayalam. So I was wondering, how has the language evolved as it especially with the the proliferation of higher education?
Yeah, about well, I want to share a story with you on this, because yes, the Malayalam that you learn in your syllabus is often it's full of Sanskrit. I think your generation is better off than mine. When we were in school and college, we studied Malayalam that was intensely Sanskritized. I think the present generation is kind of freeing itself a bit from that. But I still remember when I was a young academic back in the 90s, I used to offer a small set of lectures in the colleges near my university called the Cultural History of Kerala. So it used to be a series of talks, but began with a quiz. Basically, the aim of the quiz was to convince the students that they did not know anything substantial, even if they thought they did. So I used to give out a set of questions and show them a picture of and ask them, what kind of woman is this and so on, what caste she belongs to. So one of those questions was about translation. It's a translation challenge. So this is a word called palidam, a word called milk bar. So I used to ask students to translate the word milk bar. So milk bar was common in Kerala at that time. So inevitably the smarty pies in the class would raise their hands and say, Kshirashala. So proper Sanskrit. And then I would offer them a Tamil translation of that word, which I found right opposite the Shuchindram temple. So it said Palidam. So I would tell them, okay, so what if I replace the Kshirashala with Palidam? The whole class would, as if they had recovered some Tamil essence. So, the problem with Malayalam is that it's a bit schizophrenic. That is, you write it in Sanskrit, but you speak it in Tamil. So in Malayalam, you write the word, say, vada, vada, vata. You write it vata, but will you pronounce it vata? No, you will always say vada. So അത് തമിഴിൻ ഈ ഉച്ചാരണം തമിഴിലും എഴുത്ത് സംസ്കൃതത്തിലും ആയിപ്പോയി. അതാണ് അവിടുത്തെ പ്രശ്നം. So it's so it's a bit that tension was always there, but now I think we are conscious of that. So, and we are not ashamed of it. We are not ashamed of so many English words in Malayalam anymore, because ഞാൻ ചോദിക്കട്ടെ, that thing rotating on there, അത് fan അല്ലേ? Okay, I know your English teacher will say it's fan, not fan. പക്ഷെ നമുക്ക് മലയാളത്തിൽ അത് ഫാനാണ് അല്ലേ? അതാണ്.
Okay, if not, thank you so much. Thanks a lot, Devika, and I would really urge you to Feeling Kerala is there in the bookstore, please do read the book. It's extremely interesting view of the state. Thank you so much.